How's it going, everyone, and welcome back to Deck Ready. I have spent the weekend playing with my Steam Deck, testing out tons and tons of games. I went through the comments on my last video, which was an unboxing. Definitely check it out if you haven't, and I picked out some games that people suggested, and I picked out a few of my own, based on what I think people are probably going to want to play on the Steam Deck. So for this video, I'm literally just going to play through a few of these games with the game scope up, so you can see the frame rate, you can see the frame time, you can see everything you need to know about how a game runs, and see if you want to play it on a Steam Deck. And real quick before we jump into the video, if you want to see more videos like this, subscribe to the channel and set your notifications to all. All right, so the first game I'm going to check out here is Elden Ring, and if you're playing on PC, the Steam Deck is arguably the best place to play this game because Valve released a new version of Proton Experimental, the Bleeding Edge version, that kind of fixes most of the stuttering in this game. Now, I have it locked at 30 frames per second at the game's high setting. If you unlock the frame rate, it can run up to like 60 frames per second, but it usually hovers between 30 and 45. So I just figured I'd lock it to 30. Now, there are a couple areas I will show you in the actual game where it drops to about 28 frames per second, but those are kind of few and far between, and this game just plays so well on a handheld. So the first thing I'm going to do is limit the frame rate to 30 in the Steam Deck's OS because you can't really do it in the actual game. And then I'm gonna hit continue. All right, so you can see here in the settings that it's on the high quality preset. I have it set at 720p resolution instead of the native 800p because if you use 800p, it puts black bars on top and bottom anyway. So yeah, this area that I'm in right now is sort of like an undead camp, and you can see that it's locked. Like that frame time graph is pretty flat. It gets a little bit shaky when you start going into this camp specifically. I don't really know why, but this is the only area in the game where I've seen it drop below 30 frames per second. And even then, it's completely playable. So I've done this a million times. I try and grind this out. I screwed up here. I shouldn't have kited both shield guys out here. You can see that the flow of gameplay is totally fine. Like, this game is definitely playable at 30 frames per second, especially if you've played Dark Souls games before. A lot of them on console were running at 30, to the point where when Dark Souls 1 came out on PC, it was actually pretty tough to run it right at 60 because the game's animations weren't designed for that. You can see that when you start to run across the map, you get a little bit of a frame drop when you get by this camp, but then when you get past it, it goes right back up to 30. There is pop-in, as you can see. So yeah, the Valve fix for this does a lot, but it doesn't completely fix the game. But for me, this is the best place to play Elden Ring right now because I bought the game on PC and the stuttering is just not great on my 3080 laptop. All right, so the next game I'm trying out here is Cyberpunk 2077. I pulled this straight from the comments. Immediately, I'm on the graphics menu and it set itself to the high preset. It wants to run at 30 frames per second locked. I set it to 60 just to see how close we can get. And it automatically set VSync to off, so I'm gonna turn that to 60. And right out of the gate, I'm getting not great frame rates here. About 28 FPS, even though it's running VSynced at 60 FPS. The frame time graph is pretty flat though. It doesn't actually look too bad. Okay, it is settling back out at 30. I mean, I don't know, man. This looks really good. Oh yeah, so combat definitely lowers the frame rate by quite a bit. We're down to like 20 frames per second. I don't know, that's not really good enough for me, especially with a little bit of stuttering here and there. Let's see if we can change some settings around and get a better frame rate. All right, so I dropped the preset to medium, and that was an immediate improvement in frame rate. We're running at around 34, 35 FPS. It's fluctuating for sure, but when you're above 30 frames per second, it looks really good. You do get a little bit of stuttering when you enter a new area and the new textures start loading in, but once you're there, it stays pretty hard locked at 30. Yeah, this is immediately better at medium, so I feel like if you played around with the settings just a little bit more, you could definitely lock this game at 30, and that would be more than playable for the vast majority of people out there. Next up, I'm sure you've noticed my Batmobile Lego set here. A game that I really wanted to play after watching the new Batman movie was Arkham Knight, so I ran home, and even though it says that it might not be supported on the Steam Deck, I have been very impressed with this game on the deck. This is another one where you can leave the frame rate unlocked and it'll run around 45 to 60 frames per second pretty reliably, but if you lock it to 30 frames per second, it is near flawless. Even driving around the Batmobile, it worked really well for me. And that's especially crazy when you consider the fact that there have been many Digital Foundry videos about how poor the optimization is in this game's PC port. It is very hard unless you have a very, very good rig to pull a locked 60 frames per second, and it really comes down to texture streaming. But here on the Steam Deck, this game runs really well. Again, even when you're driving around the Batmobile. All right, so I'm running Arkham Knight here at the default settings, which is pretty much everything on and set to high. That's pretty ambitious. It's set right now to run at a max frame rate of 60, and I'm gonna drop it down to 30 just to show how well it locks there. The thing that caught me by surprise here is that it says that the Steam Deck has 6 gigabytes of VRAM. I didn't actually know that going in. That's a lot of VRAM, and that I think is what's solving that stuttering issue with this game. It's got the overhead of VRAM to be able to stream the textures fast enough. All right, so you can see that the frame time graph is pretty flat across the board. I'm driving the Batmobile around here. I'm going into speed mode. I'm going into tank mode. And yeah, it is just absolutely totally flat. And that's what you want to see in a game like this that used to run so bad. Like, I have gone through 3 PCs since this game came out, and all of them have had trouble running it. And now here I am playing it at a locked 30 frames per second at high settings, which might be better than console. That's nuts. And just to show you how good the frame rate is in this game, I'm gonna take this jump with the boost mode on, with all these heavy rain effects going. And there you go. Totally flat at 30 frames per second. I can jump out of the Batmobile here. I can use the grappling hook, and anything that makes the camera move super fast like that used to tank the frame rate for me on other PCs, but it's totally smooth here. And that's what I was looking for out of this device. And I will say, I have the speakers down low while I'm playing this on camera. This thing's speakers are incredible. They have a ton of range. The left to right movement is really good. I was playing it in bed next to my fiance at like 1 volume, and she was like, can you turn that down? So yeah, it might be a little bit loud without headphones if you're playing in bed. I don't know, man. This game, having this on a handheld, I remember back when Blackgate, Arkham Origins Blackgate came out on the Vita, and I was like, this is crazy having this on a handheld. But now I'm playing Arkham Knight on a handheld, and it's running incredibly. This is a really good game. I highly recommend it too if you haven't tried it out. Now, as for Arkham Asylum and Arkham City actually works just fine, even though it kind of says that it might not be supported, and Arkham Asylum does not work. It says it's unsupported, and the reason for that is that the controls on the Steam Deck do not work when you start that game up, but it seems like it runs really well. So hopefully they patch it to be able to work with the Steam Deck, because that's a game I would really like to play. And that's one I feel like you could at least get to 60 frames per second. All right, so the next game I was asked to check out is Days Gone. And this one presets itself at a mix of high and medium settings. And under display, we're running it at a native 800p. So this is one that's basically running above PS4 settings right now, and it's locked at 30 frames per second. That frame time graph is absolutely flat. Oh my God. I gotta be honest right out of the gate, I am really impressed with how this game is running. I was not expecting this to lock at 30 frames per second and have virtually 0 frame drops at all. Like, this is crazy. This game had way more issues than most PlayStation first-party games do on the PS4 because it runs in Unreal Engine 4. It had some nasty pop-in, but all right, so I hopped on my bike here and we did get a little bit of loading stutter, but after that, when I get on the road and start messing around here, it's a pretty solid lock, 30 frames per second, man. Yeah, the pop-in is a little bit noticeable, but that was there even in the regular PC version on Windows. And it looks like this game is running absolutely flawlessly. So I'm into this. If you want to play Days Gone on the Steam Deck, I'm going to go ahead and call it more than playable. This is a go-ahead running at full PlayStation settings, except resolution, of course. All right, so the next game I have here is the original Dishonored. This is one that I hope I can get 60 frames per second out of because it's pretty old. This is an Xbox 360 game. I think this one probably should run pretty well. All right, so the options menu here, as you can see, is all set to high with all the effects on. This is not the most advanced option menu, to be clear, but it looks like it's running at native 800p, VSync on, and full screen on. So let's jump into the game. I have no idea where my save is. All right, so this is the first game I've really experienced stuttering in so far. Getting it just a little bit when I run around, sprint around here at the double jump. But it looks like it smoothed itself out. So maybe it's the similar situation where you gotta let the shaders compile, even though it says it did it in the background. It might be doing it in the actual game. But yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this is pretty dang close to a locked 60 frames per second. I just finished a quest there. I have no idea what it was. So yeah, as far as Dishonored goes, I'm giving this a completely playable, like a completely locked 60 frames per second with a little bit of stuttering at the beginning when I first loaded in, and then it just cleared right up. All right, so we're gonna go a little bit older now with the original Dead Space. I don't think this one's going to be too tough to run at all. I actually played it on the Aya Neo Next and I was pulling like 300 frames per second out of it. So if all goes according to plan here, this one should be a pretty nice hard lock at 60 frames per second. And this is another one of those games like Arkham Knight where the PC port was pretty bad, but PCs are just so good now that they kind of brute force their way through the unoptimized port. All right, so I'm in the intro cutscene. We're locked at 60 frames per second. The GPU is fluctuating between 0 and 99% usage, which is kind of odd. It doesn't look like it's killing the battery all that fast though, and it says even though I'm at 66% battery, I'm gonna get 3 hours and 38 minutes out of this game. So yeah, I think you'd be able to get realistically 5.5 hours out of Dead Space 1. That's pretty good. And this game still looks great for a really old game. I was still, I think, in middle school when this game came out. And yeah, moving the camera, lighting looks great, dialogue sounds good, and this is the perfect game where when you shrink it down, it looks even better, and it probably looks like how you remembered it instead of how it would look running in 2022. But yeah, I'm happy to call this one a locked 60 frames per second. All right, I'm loaded in here. All right, I'm loaded into Resident Evil 7 here at the settings it wanted to use, which is basically the lowest settings possible. And yeah, it is getting a completely locked 60 frames per second, which is nice, but I would like to bump these settings up and see how it runs because I just feel like this engine isn't that crazy. All right, so I bumped everything up to pretty much all settings and noticed that it was trying to run at below 1.0 render resolution. It's not exactly locked at 60 frames per second, but this is a more than playable 60, and for the reason that I was predicting, which is that most of this game takes place in a farmhouse. You know, it's nothing too wild in terms of being in an open world or anything like that. And you know, you get a little bit of frame time stutter when you're moving the camera too much, but I think again, that's mainly caused by shader compilation, which means over time, it will probably get better. All right, so the next game I have here is Doom Eternal, one of my favorite FPSs of all time. I'm gonna check the settings before I jump into it. So right now it's defaulting at full screen, 480p. It doesn't honestly look that bad though at this resolution. So honestly, while you'd think 480p wouldn't look that good since it's about half this screen's resolution, it does not look too bad. And this seems like a good opportunity to try FSR. So I've got it on with the sharpness set to 5. And yeah, immediately it looks much better. So I'm gonna leave it at this resolution here just to see if it stays locked at 60. Also, you're gonna have to forgive me here on the quality. I played this game on keyboard and mouse and I have not tried it on the Steam Deck. But yeah, look at that frame time graph all the way across. It's totally flat and all the effects are set to ultra. Holy crap, this does not look like a 480p game at all. All right, so the fan is kicking up, and yeah, when you start to get all these enemies on screen, it's dropping down to about 55, 52, 53, 50 FPS. That's not amazing, and yeah, again, it's 480p. I'm not super hype on that. I'm sure I could drop the settings down to a high or medium, and it would run at a locked 60. This game is such a good port and it's so malleable, I could spend all day messing around with the settings. This is not a game I would play at 30. I would do anything I can to get it to lock at 60, but I don't think you're gonna have to drop it to lowest settings or anything to really get that out of it. All right, so that wraps up my first frame rate test video here playing games on the Steam Deck. You know, there weren't that many games that disappointed me. The only one that stands out, which I may have cut from this video so you're not even going to see it, is Dying Light 2. That game did not start. It crashed to the desktop once, and then when I tried to start it again, it hard crashed the device, which is not great. But other than that, every game ran really well. Doom Eternal is one that I wish on its default settings stayed at a locked 60, but it was so close that I'm confident once again that you could get 60 frames per second out of it. Overall, this device has really exceeded my expectations. It's performing way better than the Aya Neo Next did. It feels much better in the hand. The battery life guessing that it does with that game scope menu is very accurate from what I've seen. And for old games like Dead Space, for example, this console is gonna be incredible. So again, if you want me to check out any other games in a future video, let me know down in the comments below. And remember, help me out by subscribing if you haven't already.